The Boy Who Stopped the Trial, a story of courage and truth. The courtroom was silent, save for the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. The judge, a stern woman with silver-rimmed glasses, had just raised her gavel when a young voice rang out, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Stop the trial. I have something to say." All eyes turned toward the boy standing in the middle of the aisle. He couldn't have been older than 10, his blonde hair slightly disheveled, his blue eyes burning with determination. Gasps and whispers spread through the crowd as the bailiff moved to remove him. But before he could, the boy's voice cracked with urgency. "You can't throw me out. I know something that will change everything." The judge hesitated, curiosity flickering in her sharp gaze. A murder trial was no place for a child, but the conviction in his voice gave her pause. "What do you mean?" she asked. The boy took a shaky breath, his small hands clenched into fists. He pointed to the defendant, Lucas Hart, a man who had been accused of murdering his girlfriend, Alyssa Green. Lucas sat frozen at the defense table, his hollow cheeks and tired eyes widening as if he were seeing a ghost. "I know he didn't do it," the boy said, his voice trembling but steady, "because I saw what really happened." The courtroom erupted into chaos. The judge banged her gavel, calling for order. A man in a dark suit burst through the doors, his face pale with fear. "Ethan," he shouted, "what are you doing here?" But Ethan Miller didn't turn. He kept his gaze locked on the judge. "Please," he whispered, "you have to listen to me." And so the boy was led into the judge's chambers, away from the stunned crowd. There, with the weight of the law pressing down on him, Ethan told his story. Weeks earlier, while riding his bike through the park, he had witnessed an argument between a man and a woman near the lake. The man had looked scared, desperate, not angry, and the woman, she wasn't Alyssa Green. She had blonde hair, not dark. Something about it had felt wrong, but Ethan hadn't known what to do. Then Alyssa's murder had made headlines, and Ethan had recognized the man from that day, Lucas Hart. Unable to keep quiet, Ethan had come to court, risking everything to tell the truth. The judge listened carefully. Could this boy's testimony change the course of the trial? Could an innocent man be set free? One thing was certain. Ethan Miller had done something few would dare to do. He had stood up for justice, proving that sometimes the smallest voice could make the biggest difference. The truth in the shadows. Ethan Miller's fight for justice. Ethan Miller sat in the judge's chambers, his small hands clenched together in his lap as he stared at the polished wooden desk in front of him. The room felt far too big, the towering bookcases and heavy curtains making it seem like the walls were closing in. Judge Harper sat across from him, her expression unreadable as she folded her hands. "Ethan," she said, her voice measured but firm, "what you did in that courtroom was reckless. But if what you're saying is true, it could change everything. So I need you to tell me exactly what you saw." Ethan swallowed hard. His heart was pounding, but he knew he had to be brave. He took a deep breath and began. "I was riding my bike through the park a few weeks ago," he said. "It was late afternoon. I saw a man arguing with a woman near the lake. He looked scared, like he didn't want to be there. He kept looking around, like he thought someone was watching him. Then he grabbed her arm, and she tried to pull away. I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what." The judge studied him carefully. "And this man? You're certain it was Lucas Hart?" "Yes, ma'am," Ethan nodded. "I didn't know who he was at the time, but when I saw his picture on the news, I recognized him right away. And the woman? Judge Harper pressed. Ethan hesitated. This was the part that had been eating at him for weeks. It wasn't Alyssa Green. The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly. Explain. Alyssa Green had dark hair, Ethan said. The woman I saw had blonde hair. That's why I got confused at first. But then, I found something. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, worn sunflower keychain. It glinted under the soft light of the office. I found this in the dirt near the lake, he said, placing it on the desk. Then I looked through old photos of Alyssa online. She had this exact same keychain on her purse. Judge Harper picked it up, turning it over in her fingers. A heavy silence settled over the room. So you believe Alyssa was in the park that day, she asked. Ethan nodded. Yes, ma'am. But I don't think she left with Lucas Hart. The judge tapped her fingers on the desk, deep in thought. Then she reached for the intercom. Bailiff, bring in the attorneys. We need to discuss this immediately. The defense attorney's interest. Within minutes, Lucas Hart's attorney, Miss Connor, and the prosecutor, Miss Winters, were seated in the judge's office. Mr. Winters looked irritated, while Miss Connor seemed intrigued. Your Honor, this is absurd. Winters scoffed. We can't base an entire case on the ramblings of a child. A child who saw something none of us did. Judge Harper corrected him. Winters, are you saying this boy's testimony has no value? Winters hesitated. I'm saying we have solid evidence linking Lucas Hart to Alyssa's murder. A keychain found in a park isn't going to change that. Miss Connor leaned forward, her eyes sharp. But if the victim was at the park that day, and there was another woman involved, that changes the timeline. It introduces reasonable doubt. Ethan could feel the tension in the room. He knew he had to speak up. I think the woman in the park was Rachel Daniels, he blurted out. Winters frowned. Who? Alyssa's best friend, Ethan explained. I found an old picture of them together. She had blonde hair just like the woman I saw that day. Miss Connor's face darkened. Rachel Daniels disappeared right after Alyssa's murder. Judge Harper nodded. If she was with Lucas that day, we need to find her. She could be the missing piece to this case. Winters still looked doubtful, but he didn't argue further. I'll have my investigators look into it, Judge Harper decided. In the meantime, this trial is on hold. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He had done it. He had stopped the trial. But something in his gut told him this was far from over. The threats begin. That night, Ethan lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. He should have felt relieved, but all he felt was a growing sense of unease. Had he really done the right thing? Then his phone buzzed. Sitting up, he grabbed it from the nightstand and checked the screen. A new email. Subject, stay out of it. His hands trembled as he opened it. You don't know what you're getting into, kid. Drop this now or you'll regret it. Attached to the message was a photo. Ethan's blood ran cold. It was a picture of him, taken through his bedroom window. He dropped the phone, his breath coming in short gasps. Someone had been watching him. Someone didn't want him digging any further. He scrambled out of bed and ran to his mom's room. Mom, he whispered urgently, shaking her awake. Jessica Miller blinked at him sleepily, then sat up when she saw his pale face. Ethan, what's wrong? He handed her the phone. The moment she saw the email, her expression darkened. That's it, she said firmly. We're calling the police. Within minutes, Officer Ramirez arrived. She read the email, her jaw tightening. This just got a whole lot bigger, she said. Ethan, you need to be careful. If someone is threatening you, it means you're onto something important. I don't care, Ethan said, his voice shaking. I'm not stopping. Ramirez studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, then we'll find out who's behind this together. A dangerous truth. The next morning, Ramirez pulled Ethan aside after speaking with the judge. We found something, she said. We traced Rachel Daniels' last known location. She wasn't just missing, she was hiding. Ethan's stomach twisted. Hiding from who? Ramirez hesitated. We're not sure yet, but one thing is certain. Whoever killed Alyssa might have gone after Rachel too. Ethan clenched his fists. He had started this to prove Luca's heart was innocent, but now it was about more than that. It was about justice for Alyssa, for Rachel, and for the truth. But if the killer was still out there watching him, waiting, then the real danger had only just begun. The final pieces. Ethan Miller's pursuit of justice. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, his fingers gripping the sunflower keychain tightly. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on him, his testimony, the threats, and now the revelation that Rachel Daniels had gone into hiding. Rachel knew something dangerous enough to make her vanish, and Ethan had a gut feeling that if they found her, they'd find the truth about Alyssa Green's murder. His phone buzzed, breaking the heavy silence in his room. It was Officer Ramirez. Ethan, we have a lead. Ethan sat up straighter. Did you find Rachel? Not yet, Ramirez admitted. But we found someone who might know where she is. Meet me at the police station in an hour. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his hoodie, stuffed the keychain into his pocket, and rushed out of his room. The informant. At the station, Ramirez led Ethan into a small interview room. Sitting across the table was a man in his late 20s, with a scruffy beard and nervous eyes. This is Derek Lowe, Ramirez said. He used to run in the same circles as Kyle Becker. Ethan's stomach twisted. Kyle Becker, the man Ethan had identified as the person in the park that day, and the one who was now behind bars. Derek came forward after Kyle's arrest. Ramirez continued. He says he has information about Rachel Daniels. Ethan sat down, his pulse quickening. You're the kid who blew this case open, huh? Derek said, eyeing Ethan curiously. Didn't think a little guy like you could cause so much trouble. Just tell us what you know, Ethan shot back, ignoring the comment. Derek smirked, but his expression turned serious. Rachel Daniels was smarter than any of us gave her credit for. After Alyssa was killed, she started asking too many questions, just like you. It got her into trouble. What kind of trouble? Ramirez pressed. Derek hesitated, his fingers tapping against the table. Rachel found something about Kyle and the people he worked for. She was scared. She told me she was leaving town, but she never made it that far. Ethan felt his heart sink. You think something happened to her? Derek exhaled sharply. I know something happened. A week after she disappeared, I got a text from an unknown number. It just said, "Stay quiet or you're next." Ethan swallowed hard. He had received the same kind of threats. Do you have any idea where she might have gone? Ramirez asked. Derek nodded slowly. There's an abandoned motel outside of town. Rachel mentioned it once, said it was the kind of place no one would look for her. If she's alive, she might be there. Ramirez exchanged a glance with Ethan. That's enough to go on. We'll check it out. Derek leaned forward, his voice low. If you do find her, be careful. If she's still breathing, that means someone's still hunting her. The search for Rachel. The abandoned motel was exactly what Ethan expected. Run down, overgrown with weeds, and eerily quiet. Ramirez parked a car just outside the entrance. 2 other officers followed behind in a separate vehicle. "Stay close to me," Ramirez instructed as they stepped onto the cracked pavement. Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning the darkened windows of the motel. Something about this place sent a chill down his spine. They checked the first few rooms, empty, filled with nothing but dust and forgotten furniture. But when they reached the last room at the end of the hall, Ramirez paused. The door was locked, but the handle was scratched and dented, as if someone had tried to force their way inside. Ramirez knocked. "Rachel Daniels, it's the police. If you're in there, we just want to help." Silence. Then a faint sound, a shuffle, a breath. Someone was inside. Ramirez signaled for the other officers. They positioned themselves carefully before she spoke again. "Rachel, we're coming in." She turned the handle. The door didn't budge. One of the officers stepped forward and kicked it open. Inside, the room was dark, but in the corner, curled up against the wall, was a woman. Her blonde hair was tangled, her face thin and pale, her eyes wide with fear. Rachel Daniels, Rachel's truth. Ethan watched as Rachel trembled, pressing herself into the corner as if she expected them to hurt her. "It's okay," Ramirez said gently. "You're safe now." Rachel's eyes flickered to Ethan. "The boy," she whispered. Ethan stepped closer. "You remember me?" Rachel nodded slowly. "You were at the trial. You stopped it." "Because I knew Lucas Hart was innocent," Ethan said. "And I think you do too." Rachel swallowed hard. "Kyle killed Alyssa." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "He told her if she left him, he'd make sure no one else ever had her," Rachel said, her voice shaking. "I tried to warn her. I told her to stay away from him, but she didn't listen." Tears welled in her eyes. "That night, I saw everything. I saw him take her. I saw him hurt her. And when I tried to go to the police, I got a note on my car, 'Shut up or die.'" Ethan clenched his fists. "That's why you ran." Rachel nodded. "I didn't know who to trust. I thought maybe if I disappeared they'd leave me alone. But they didn't, did they?" Ramirez shook her head. "No, they came after Ethan too." Rachel turned to Ethan, real fear in her eyes. "You're just a kid. You shouldn't be in this mess." "Maybe," Ethan said, his voice firm. "But I couldn't let them get away with it." Rachel exhaled shakily. "Then you need to know the rest of the truth. The final revelation." Rachel reached into the bag beside her and pulled out a small notebook. "Alyssa kept a journal," she said. "She wrote down everything. About Kyle, about his threats, about how scared she was." She handed it to Ramirez. "This is the evidence we need," Ramirez said, flipping through the pages. "This, combined with your testimony, will put Kyle Becker away for life." Rachel shuddered. "I just want this to be over." Ramirez placed a hand on her shoulder. "It will be. We'll protect you." Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had done it. The truth was finally coming to light. But as they left the motel, he couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't right. Kyle was behind bars. They had Rachel's testimony. They had Alyssa's journal. But who had been watching him? Who had sent the email? And more importantly, was the real mastermind still out there? As the police escorted Rachel to safety, Ethan glanced at the darkened horizon. He had uncovered the truth about Alyssa's murder, but his fight wasn't over yet. The final confrontation. Ethan Miller's search for the mastermind. Ethan sat in the police station, staring at the evidence laid out before him. The sunflower keychain, the bracelet, Alyssa Green's journal, and the threatening email. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, but something still felt off. Kyle Becker had been arrested. Rachel Daniels had come forward with her testimony. The police had enough evidence to close the case, but the man who had broken into Ethan's house, the one who had chased him in the park, he was still out there, and Ethan had a terrible feeling that he wasn't working alone. The mysterious figure, Officer Ramirez, paced in front of him, rubbing her temples. "Kyle isn't talking," she said. "He's lawyered up. But Rachel's testimony is solid, and Alyssa's journal confirms everything she told us. Then why does it feel like something is missing?" Ethan asked, frowning. Ramirez sighed. "Because someone else is involved. But without hard evidence, we can't go after them." Ethan thought back to the man in the hoodie. He had threatened him, broken into his home, and sent that chilling email with the picture of his mother. He was still watching. What if Kyle wasn't the mastermind? Ethan asked. What if he was just following orders? Ramirez's expression darkened. "That's a dangerous thought, kid. And if you're right, we need to tread carefully." Ethan's phone buzzed. He pulled it out and felt his stomach drop. Another email. Subject: "You should have stayed quiet." Attached was a video. With shaking hands, Ethan pressed play. The footage was grainy, taken from a security camera. It showed Rachel Daniels stepping out of the police station just an hour ago. But what made Ethan's blood run cold was the figure watching her from the shadows. The same hooded man. Ethan jumped to his feet. "They're after Rachel." Ramirez didn't hesitate. "Let's go." The chase. By the time they reached the safe house where Rachel was being kept, the front door was wide open. Inside, the furniture was overturned, and the air was thick with tension. Rachel was gone. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. He had been so close to helping her escape this nightmare, and now she had been taken. Ramirez's radio crackled to life. "We have a lead," another officer reported. Security cameras picked up a dark SUV, speeding out of town. "We're tracking it now." "Where is it headed?" Ramirez demanded. "An abandoned warehouse near the docks." Ethan's heart pounded. "That's where they took her." Ramirez shot him a look. "You stay in the car when we get there." Ethan nodded, but he had no intention of staying behind. The warehouse showdown. By the time they arrived at the docks, the warehouse loomed ahead. Its windows dark, its walls rusted from years of neglect. A single SUV was parked outside. Ramirez and the other officers moved in quietly, guns drawn. Ethan stayed low, creeping along the side of the building, his pulse hammering in his ears. Inside, muffled voices echoed. "You should have left it alone, Rachel." That voice. Ethan recognized it. It wasn't Kyle Becker. It was someone else. Carefully, he peeked through a crack in the wooden planks. Rachel was tied to a chair, her face bruised, but her eyes filled with defiance. Standing over her was a tall man in a suit, his face half hidden in the dim light. Ethan's stomach turned. It was the prosecutor from Lucas Hart's trial, the real mastermind. "You put Kyle away," the prosecutor said coldly. "But you didn't tell them everything, did you?" Rachel spat blood onto the floor. "I know what you did." The prosecutor smirked. "And what's that?" "You covered for him," Rachel whispered. "You knew Kyle killed Alyssa, and you helped frame Lucas, because Kyle had something on you." Ethan's mind reeled. The prosecutor had manipulated the entire case. He had buried evidence, made sure the jury only saw what he wanted them to see. He had nearly let an innocent man go to prison, all to protect himself. Ethan's hands shook with anger. He had to do something. Carefully, he pulled out his phone and hit record. Inside, the prosecutor continued, "You should have stayed hidden, Rachel, but you came back, and now, I have to clean up your mess." He pulled a gun from his coat. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had to act. Now. The intervention. With shaking fingers, Ethan sent the recording to Officer Ramirez. Then, without thinking, he picked up a nearby metal pipe and slammed it against the warehouse wall. The noise echoed. The prosecutor spun around. "What the—" The warehouse doors burst open. "Free!" Ramirez shouted. Gun raised, the prosecutor turned back to Rachel, but before he could do anything, Ramirez fired a warning shot. "Drop the gun." The prosecutor hesitated, then smirked. "You think you've won?" He lunged for Rachel, but Ramirez was faster. A single shot rang out. The prosecutor crumpled to the ground. Silence fell over the warehouse, except for Rachel's heavy breathing. It was over. Justice served. Hours later, Ethan sat in the police station once more, his hands wrapped around a warm cup of cocoa that Ramirez had handed him. Across from him, Rachel sat, finally free from fear. "You saved my life," she murmured. Ethan shook his head. "I just did what was right." Ramirez walked in, her expression both relieved and serious. "The prosecutor was running more than just a cover-up," she said. "Turns out, Kyle Becker was part of a bigger operation. He had connections to other cases, other wrongful convictions." Ethan swallowed hard. "How many?" "Too many," Ramirez admitted. "But thanks to you, we've exposed it." Rachel reached over and squeezed Ethan's hand. "Because of you, Alyssa finally got justice." A lump formed in Ethan's throat. He had spent so long trying to prove the truth, to make people listen. Now, finally, it was done. Kyle Becker and his accomplices were going to prison. Lucas Hart was free, and Rachel Daniels was safe. A new beginning. A week later, Ethan stood outside the courthouse, staring up at the sky. It felt strange. After months of fear, uncertainty, and danger, it was finally over. His mother stood beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You did something incredible, Ethan." He smiled faintly. "I just told the truth. And sometimes, that's the bravest thing you can do," she said. As they walked away, Ethan glanced down at his pocket. The sunflower keychain rested there, a reminder of everything he had been through. He had uncovered the truth, he had fought for justice, and he had won. But deep down he knew this was only the beginning, because the world was full of injustices, and Ethan Miller wasn't done fighting them yet. The last clue, Ethan Miller's final discovery. Ethan Miller had thought the nightmare was over. Kyle Becker was in prison. Lucas Hart had been exonerated. Rachel Daniels was safe. But something still didn't feel right. There were too many unanswered questions, too many loose ends, and the biggest one of all was the man in the black hoodie, the one who had chased Ethan in the park, broken into his house, and threatened him through emails. He wasn't Kyle Becker. He wasn't the corrupt prosecutor. So who was he? A ghost from the past. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring at the now familiar sunflower keychain resting in his palm. It had been a crucial clue in proving Lucas's innocence. but now it felt like a reminder that something was still unfinished. His mother, Jessica, sat across from him, sipping her coffee. "You've been quiet," she said, watching him carefully. "Something still doesn't make sense," Ethan admitted. "Kyle Becker was guilty, but he wasn't the one threatening me. That man in the hoodie, he's still out there." Jessica frowned. "Ethan, we've been through enough. The police are handling it." "What if they're looking in the wrong place?" he countered. "What if there's more to the story?" His mother sighed but didn't argue. She knew by now that once Ethan had a gut feeling about something, he wouldn't let it go. And this time, neither would he. A mysterious name. Determined to find answers, Ethan dug back into the evidence. He scrolled through old articles, police reports, and Rachel Daniels' testimony. Then something caught his eye. Buried deep in one of the files Ramirez had shared with him was a name Ethan didn't recognize: Jeremy Langley. The name appeared only once in the records, a footnote in an old police report about Alyssa Green's murder. According to the document, Langley had been questioned as a potential witness, but was never called to testify. Why? Ethan typed the name into a search engine. Nothing. No social media. No articles. No online records. It was as if Jeremy Langley didn't exist. But Ethan knew better. He did exist, and Ethan was going to find him. Following the trail, Ethan waited until his mom left for work, then grabbed his backpack, hopped on his bike and headed straight to the police station. Officer Ramirez was surprised to see him. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "I need your help," Ethan said, dropping into the chair across from her desk. "Does the name Jeremy Langley mean anything to you?" Ramirez's expression changed instantly. It was subtle, but Ethan noticed her shoulders tensed, and she glanced at her computer screen before answering. "Where did you hear that name?" "It was in the case files." Ramirez hesitated, then sighed. "Langley was listed as a witness, but he disappeared before he could testify. We never found him." "What if he didn't disappear?" Ethan asked. "What if someone made sure he stayed quiet?" Ramirez's face darkened. "What are you thinking, Ethan?" "I think he's the man in the hoodie, the one who chased me." Silence filled the room. Then Ramirez stood up. "Come with me." Finding Jeremy Langley, Ramirez drove Ethan through the city, her hands tight on the steering wheel. "We searched for Langley months ago," she explained. "He worked as a mechanic, but after Alyssa's murder, he quit his job, left his apartment, and vanished." "What if he didn't vanish?" Ethan asked. "What if he was hiding?" Ramirez nodded. "That's what we're going to find out." They pulled into a rundown part of town, stopping in front of an old auto shop. The sign above the door read, "Langley's Repairs." Ethan's pulse quickened. Ramirez led the way inside. The shop was dimly lit, the scent of motor oil thick in the air. A man in grease-stained overalls looked up from under the hood of a car. Ethan recognized him instantly. The man in the hoodie. Jeremy Langley. The truth revealed. Langley's eyes widened in alarm as he spotted Ethan and Ramirez. "I already told you people I don't know anything," he snapped, grabbing a rag and wiping his hands. "That's a lie," Ethan said, stepping forward. Langley's jaw clenched. "Why have you been following me?" Ethan demanded. "Why did you threaten me?" Langley exhaled sharply, then glanced at Ramirez. "You need to leave, officer. This has nothing to do with you." Ramirez crossed her arms. "It has everything to do with me." Langley looked torn, then finally muttered, "Fine." He motioned for them to follow him into the back office. Inside, Langley locked the door and sat down. His hands were shaking. You want the truth, he said, looking straight at Ethan. Tell me, Ethan urged. Langley hesitated, then spoke. Alyssa didn't just die because of Kyle Becker. She died because of what she found out about him. Ethan and Ramirez exchanged glances. What did she find out? Ramirez asked. Langley ran a hand through his hair. Kyle was involved in something bigger than just a crime of passion. He was part of a trafficking ring. Ethan's breath caught. Human trafficking? Langley nodded grimly. Alyssa found out. She was going to go to the police. Kyle couldn't let that happen. Ramirez's face hardened. And you? How do you fit into this? Langley sighed. I was their driver. I didn't know what they were doing at first, but when I found out, I tried to back out. That's when they threatened me. After Alyssa was killed, I knew I was next, so I ran. Ethan's mind spun. Kyle Becker's crimes weren't just about Alyssa. He was part of something far worse. Who else is involved? Ramirez pressed. Langley swallowed hard. I don't know all their names, but I do know one thing. What? Ethan asked. Langley looked him dead in the eyes. They're still watching, and they know about you. A dangerous revelation. Ethan's blood ran cold. They sent the emails, he realized. They sent the threats. Langley nodded. I followed you because I was trying to warn you, he admitted. I was trying to scare you off before they could get to you. Ethan felt sick. And now? Ramirez asked. Langley sighed. They're coming. Ramirez's radio crackled to life. Dispatch to Officer Ramirez. We have a situation. 2 black SUVs spotted near your location. Possible hostiles. Langley shot to his feet. It's them. Ethan's heart pounded. They weren't safe. The real danger was just beginning. As the sound of engines roared outside, Ethan realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about Alyssa anymore. This was about something much, much bigger. And now, they were in the crosshairs. The fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Ethan Miller's final battle for justice. The truth had finally come to light. Alyssa Green's murder wasn't just a crime of passion. It was part of a much larger and more sinister operation. Kyle Becker had been a key player in a human trafficking ring, and Alyssa had discovered too much. But Kyle hadn't worked alone. Someone else had silenced her. And now Ethan Miller was in danger for uncovering the truth. The escape begins. Ethan's pulse pounded as he watched the 2 black SUVs pull up outside Langley's auto shop. He counted at least 4 men stepping out, tall, broad-shouldered figures, dressed in dark clothing. Even from inside, he could see the glint of weapons holstered at their sides. Langley cursed under his breath. They found me. We have to go now. Officer Ramirez pulled out her radio. This is Officer Ramirez. I need immediate backup at Langley's repairs. Armed suspects outside. Suspected ties to human trafficking operation. The radio crackled, but there was no response. They're jamming it, Langley muttered. Ethan's chest tightened. What do we do? Langley grabbed a set of keys from his desk and tossed them to Ramirez. There's a back door leading to the alley. Take my truck and get the kid out of here. What about you? Ramirez asked. Langley gave her a grim smile. I'll hold them off as long as I can. Ethan wanted to argue, but Ramirez grabbed his wrist. Come on. They sprinted to the back of the shop just as the front door burst open. Shouting voices and heavy footsteps echoed behind them. Ramirez threw open the back door, revealing a rusted old pickup truck. She shoved Ethan inside. Get down and don't move. Ethan obeyed, curling into a ball on the floor as Ramirez started the engine. Tires screeched as they tore out of the alley, dust kicking up behind them. Gunfire rang out. Bullets shattered the truck's rear window, but Ramirez kept driving, weaving through the narrow streets of the industrial district. Ethan's heart pounded as he peeked out. One of the SUVs was following them. "They're gaining on us," Ethan shouted. Ramirez gritted her teeth. "Hold on tight." She yanked the steering wheel, sending the truck veering onto a side street. The SUV followed, closing the gap. Ethan's mind raced. Think. Then he saw it, a construction site up ahead, blocked off by orange cones and metal barricades. Ramirez go through it. She didn't hesitate. The truck plowed through the barricades, sending cones flying. The SUV followed, but it wasn't as lucky. The driver miscalculated, and the vehicle slammed into a stack of concrete pipes. Ethan exhaled sharply as Ramirez sped away, leaving their pursuers behind. "That was too close," she muttered. "Where are we going?" Ethan asked. "Somewhere safe." But Ethan knew nowhere was safe anymore. A desperate gamble. They pulled into an underground parking garage, far from prying eyes. Ramirez turned off the engine and turned to Ethan. "We have to go to the police station," she said. "We'll put you in protective custody until we bring these guys down." But Ethan shook his head. "That's not enough. We need to expose them. We need the whole world to see what they've done." Ramirez hesitated. "Ethan, these people are dangerous, and they'll keep hurting people if we don't stop them," he countered. Ramirez sighed, rubbing her temples. "What do you have in mind?" Ethan took a deep breath. "We go public. We take everything we've found. The documents, Rachel's testimony, Langley's confession, and we release it online. News outlets, social media, everything." Ramirez stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "If we do this, we can't turn back," she warned. "I know." And so they got to work. The truth goes viral. Ramirez contacted her most trusted colleagues, gathering every piece of evidence they had. Ethan compiled all the files he had saved, the threatening emails, the photos, the keychain that had started it all. Then Ramirez reached out to a journalist she trusted, a veteran reporter named Daniel Foster. Within hours the story was live. The headline read, "Inside the Shadows: The Truth About Alyssa Green's Murder and the Human Trafficking Ring Cover-Up." The article detailed everything: Kyle Becker's involvement, the mysterious threats, Langley's confession, the corrupt officials who had tried to bury the truth. It spread like wildfire. TV stations picked it up. Social media exploded with outrage. Calls flooded the police department, demanding action. And then the real bombshell dropped. Rachel Daniels came forward. With the media watching, she publicly testified, confirming everything Ethan had uncovered. She revealed the names of the traffickers, the corrupt officials who had protected them, and the horrifying details of how they had silenced Alyssa. The backlash was immediate. Arrest warrants were issued. Corrupt officers and prosecutors were exposed. Federal agents took over the case, dismantling the trafficking operation piece by piece. Ethan had done it, but it wasn't over yet. The final confrontation, the night after the story broke. Ramirez drove Ethan home. They had police protection now, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. And he was right. As they pulled into the driveway, Ethan saw movement near the bushes. His heart stopped. Ramirez, before he could finish, a figure lunged out, gun in hand. The man in the black hoodie. The real mastermind. "Get down!" Ramirez shouted, reaching for her weapon. But the man was fast. He grabbed Ethan, yanking him out of the truck. "You should have stayed quiet, kid," he growled. Ethan struggled, but the man was strong. "Let him go," Ramirez ordered, aiming her gun. The man laughed. "You don't have the guts to shoot." Ramirez's jaw clenched. "Try me." Tires screeched in the distance. Police sirens wailed. The man hesitated for a split second, just enough for Ethan to act. He stomped on the man's foot, twisted free, and threw himself to the ground. A gunshot rang out. The man staggered, clutching his shoulder. Ramirez had fired. Within seconds, officers swarmed the area, tackling the man to the ground. It was over. Justice served. Days later, Ethan sat in the courtroom as the final trial took place. The man in the hoodie, identified as Daniel Grayson, a high-ranking member of the trafficking ring, was sentenced to life in prison. Langley testified, exposing everything he knew. Rachel's courage helped bring down the rest of the operation. And Ethan, he became a hero. Journalists praised him. The police commended his bravery. Even strangers on the street recognized him, thanking him for speaking out. But Ethan didn't care about fame. He only cared about justice. As he stood outside the courthouse, staring up at the clear blue sky, he felt something he hadn't in months. Peace. It had been a long, terrifying journey. But in the end, the truth had won. And Ethan Miller had proven that even one voice, even a kid's, could change the world. Ethan Miller's last stand. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, spectators, and attorneys filled every available seat as the final trial in Alyssa Green's case reached its climactic conclusion. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation after months of investigations, threats, and near escapes. Ethan Miller was about to testify against the last remaining conspirators in the trafficking ring that had taken Alyssa's life. Ethan sat in the witness box, his fingers gripping the wooden railing as he faced the man who had orchestrated everything. Victor Russo, the elusive kingpin, who had manipulated everyone from police officers to prosecutors to keep his operation hidden. Russo was an older man, with slicked-back silver hair and a composed, almost bored expression. He had watched the trial unfold for weeks, barely reacting as his associates were convicted one by one. But now, for the first time, his eyes narrowed. Ethan wasn't just another witness. He was the reason Russo was sitting in this courtroom, the testimony that changed everything. The prosecutor, Agent Reyes, stood and approached the bench. "Ethan, can you tell the court how you first became involved in this case?" Ethan took a deep breath. "It started the day Alyssa disappeared. I saw something at the park, something no one else saw. I saw Kyle Becker arguing with a woman before forcing her into his car. At first I thought it was Alyssa, but later I realized it was Rachel Daniels." There was a murmur in the courtroom. Russo's attorney, a polished man named Michael Laird, leaned back in his chair watching Ethan like a hawk. "And what happened after that?" Reyes prompted. "I told my mom, but she didn't believe me. No one did. But when I saw Kyle on the news accused of murdering Alyssa, I knew something was wrong. I started investigating, looking into the details of Alyssa's case, finding evidence that didn't add up." Reyes nodded. "Tell us about the sunflower keychain." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the small worn charm. "I found this in the park, near where Kyle had taken Rachel. Later I found a photo of Alyssa, holding a coffee cup, and this exact keychain was on her purse. That meant Alyssa had been in the park that day. But the police never mentioned it. They had assumed Kyle killed her somewhere else. This keychain proved their timeline was wrong." "And what did you do next?" Ethan clenched his hands. "I kept digging. I found Rachel's old social media posts. I discovered Kyle's threat. I even tracked down his car, but the more I found, the more danger I was in. Someone tried to break into my house. I got threatening emails, and then his voice faltered. He glanced at Russo. The older man was watching him, completely still. Then what, Ethan? Reyes pressed. Ethan swallowed. Then they came after me. The room went silent. Who came after you? Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. Victor Russo's men. Russo's defense crumbles. Russo's attorney stood abruptly. Objection, speculation. This is a child making baseless claims. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Harper, leaned forward. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Miller. Rish turned back to Ethan. Tell the court what happened the night they came after you. Ethan's mind flashed back to the safe house. The shattered window, the shadowy figure, the voice whispering, "You should have stayed out of this." They broke into my home. My mum and I barely escaped. I had already uncovered the truth about Alyssa's death, and they wanted to silence me before I could prove it. And did you prove it? Ethan sat up straighter. Yes. Rish walked over to the evidence table and lifted a folder. Your Honor, this is the final piece of evidence. Phone records linking Victor Russo to Kyle Becker and Daniel Grayson, the man who tried to kill Ethan. These calls happened days before and after Alyssa's disappearance, proving Russo was pulling the strings the entire time. Russo's calm expression didn't waver, but his fingers twitched. Laird sighed. He knew the battle was lost. No further questions, Rish said. The verdict. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. On the charges of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and human trafficking, we find the defendant Victor Russo guilty on all counts. The room erupted. Russo clenched his jaw but said nothing as officers handcuffed him and led him away. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It was over. Aftermath. A new beginning. Days later, Ethan sat outside on his front porch, the warm summer air brushing against his skin. He had done what no one else could. He had exposed a criminal empire and brought justice to Alyssa Green. But the cost had been high. His childhood innocence was gone. He had spent months living in fear, always looking over his shoulder. His mom had nearly lost everything trying to keep him safe, and Rachel Daniels. She was still struggling to recover from everything she had endured. You okay? Ethan looked up to see Officer Ramirez standing at the gate. Yeah, he said. I think so. She walked over and sat next to him. You did something incredible, Ethan. Not many people, adults or kids, would have had the courage to do what you did. I just wanted the truth, Ethan murmured. Ramirez nodded. And you found it. But listen to me, okay? This isn't just about what you uncovered. It's about what you changed. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? Because of you, the police department is investigating corrupt officers. The FBI dismantled Russo's entire operation. People who thought they were untouchable are behind bars, and families that lost loved ones to these criminals, they finally have justice. Ethan looked down at the sunflower keychain still in his hands. Alyssa would be proud, Ramirez added. He swallowed the lump in his throat. So, what happens now? Ramirez smiled. Now, you get to be a kid again. Ethan chuckled softly. I'm not sure I know how anymore. Ramirez ruffled his hair. You'll figure it out. As she stood to leave, Ethan stared up at the sky, letting the warmth of the sun soak into his skin. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid. He had fought for the truth. He had stood against powerful enemies, and he had won. Ethan Miller would always carry the scars of what he had been through, but he had proven something no one could ever take away from him. Even the smallest voice, even the voice of a kid, could change the world. Ethan Miller's unfinished battle. The trial was over. Victor Rousseau and his men were behind bars. The courtroom had erupted in cheers when the final verdict was read, and the headlines across the country hailed the young boy who had taken down a criminal empire. But Ethan Miller knew one thing for sure: this wasn't the end. Even as he sat on the porch of his home, the warm summer breeze brushing against his face, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling deep in his gut. Something was wrong. For months he had been fighting to expose the truth about Alyssa Green's murder. He had survived threats, break-ins, and near-death encounters. He had testified against powerful criminals and put them away. But despite everything, one question still haunted him. Who sent the last email? The email that had chilled him to the bone. You think you've won, but you don't know the whole story. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. And the photo attached, the picture of his mom standing outside their house, completely unaware she was being watched. That threat hadn't come from Rousseau. That meant someone else was still out there. A new mystery begins. Ethan glanced at the sunflower keychain resting in his palm, the last tangible connection he had to Alyssa. He had spent so much time proving Kyle Becker and Rousseau were behind her disappearance, but what if there was another piece of the puzzle he hadn't uncovered? He turned to his laptop and pulled up the email again. The police had traced the sender to an encrypted server, making it impossible to track. That level of sophistication wasn't something an average criminal could pull off. Ethan picked up his phone and dialed the only person he knew would take him seriously. Ramirez. The officer's voice came through the line, steady and professional. "It's me," Ethan said. There was a pause. "Ethan, you know you're supposed to be laying low. The case is over." "No, it's not," Ethan insisted. "I got another email before Rousseau's conviction. Someone else is involved, and they're still out there." Ramirez sighed. "Ethan, please," Ethan interrupted. "Just hear me out." A beat of silence. Then, "All right, what do you have?" Ethan explained everything. The email, the threats, the feeling that something was still missing. Ramirez listened carefully, and when Ethan finished, she exhaled sharply. "Okay," she said. "I'll see what I can do, but you need to promise me you won't do anything reckless." Ethan hesitated. "Ethan, fine," he said reluctantly. "I promise." But deep down he knew he wasn't going to sit back and wait. The missing witness. That night, Ethan sat at his desk, scrolling through old articles about Alyssa's case. He had looked at this information 100 times before, but this time he was searching for something different. Someone who had been overlooked. An hour passed, then another, and then his breath caught as he stumbled upon an old interview from months ago, buried deep in the archives of a local news station. Rachel Daniels, Alyssa's best friend. She had been the one to organize vigils, to push for justice, before the police had even built their case. But then, suddenly, she had disappeared from the public eye. The last time anyone had seen her was right before Rousseau's trial began. Had she gone into hiding, or had something happened to her? Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard before he started typing rapidly. If Rachel was still alive, she might have answers. He just had to find her. Following the trail. The next morning, Ethan skipped breakfast, telling his mom he was just going for a bike ride. He stuffed his phone, a notebook, and the sunflower keychain into his backpack before pedaling toward the last known address listed for Rachel Daniels. It was a rundown apartment building on the outskirts of town. When Ethan arrived, he hesitated at the door before knocking. Nothing. He knocked again, louder this time. Still no answer.
He was about to turn away when a voice from behind made him jump. Looking for someone. Ethan whirled around to see an older woman standing in the hallway, her eyes filled with suspicion. Yeah, Ethan said. Rachel Daniels, does she still live here? The woman frowned. Haven't seen her in months. She left in a hurry. Didn't even take most of her things. Landlord tossed her stuff out a few weeks ago. Ethan's heart sank. Do you know where she went? The woman shook her head. No idea, but if she's smart, she ain't coming back. Ethan thanked her and left, his mind racing. Rachel had fled. But why? And more importantly, who had scared her away?
The man in the black SUV. As Ethan biked home, he noticed a black SUV parked a few houses down from his street. The windows were tinted, but something about it felt wrong. He slowed down, pretending to adjust his backpack, and stole a glance at the driver's seat. A man in sunglasses sat behind the wheel, staring straight ahead. Watching, Ethan's stomach twisted. Was it just paranoia? Or was someone keeping tabs on him? He forced himself to pedal past the SUV without looking back, but his mind was already racing with possibilities. Whoever had sent that last email wasn't done with him yet. Rachel's message. That night, Ethan locked his bedroom door and pulled out his laptop again. If Rachel had been forced to run, maybe she had left a digital trail. He searched her name on every platform he could think of, but all her social media had gone silent. No posts, no activity, nothing. Except his heart pounded as he saw it. An old blog. Rachel had started it years ago, posting updates about Alyssa's disappearance. Most of the entries were from months ago, but one stood out. It had been posted 2 days before Russo's trial began. The title sent a chill down Ethan's spine. If something happens to me, read this. He clicked on it. The post was long, but one sentence jumped out at him. They think I don't know, but I do. It wasn't just Russo. There's someone else pulling the strings, someone even more powerful. And if I disappear, it means they got to me. Ethan's hands shook. Rachel had known. She had figured it out before anyone else. And now she was gone. The final clue. A new determination settled over Ethan. He wasn't going to let this go. Not now. Not when he was so close. He reached for his phone and dialed Ramirez. When she answered, he didn't even wait for her to speak. I know who we need to find. Who? She asked, alarmed by his urgency. Rachel Daniels. Silence. Then, Ethan, listen to me. If Rachel was forced into hiding, that means she's in real danger. You need to let us handle this. I can help. Ethan insisted. No, Ramirez said firmly. You've done enough. You need to stay safe. But Ethan knew the truth. Rachel was the last missing piece of the puzzle. And if he didn't find her soon, he might never get another chance. Life lessons from Ethan Miller's story. Truth, courage, and responsibility. Ethan Miller's journey is more than just a fight for justice. It's a powerful reminder of courage, perseverance, and personal responsibility. In life, we may face situations where the truth is buried, and speaking up can be risky. But like Ethan, if we stand firm and hold on to what's right, we can make a difference. For older generations, this story serves as a reminder that wisdom and experience can help guide younger people to do the right thing. Sometimes, simply listening and offering support can give someone the strength to uncover the truth. Life is full of secrets, but the truth cannot stay hidden forever. If we have the courage to seek it and the strength to defend it, we leave behind a legacy of integrity and honesty for future generations. No matter our age, we all have a role to play in upholding justice and standing against wrongdoing.